good afternoon and good evening, or whatever the time zone you're in watching this webinar. My name is Christopher Neale. I'm the Director of Research at the Daugherty Water for Food Global Institute at the University of Nebraska. And glad to welcome you all to this webinar. This is the first one in a series of 4, right? On the topic of One Health for global health and healthy waters, right? So that's the topic. Anyway, our institute is 10 years. This is our 10th year anniversary. Our mission is water and food security. And we do that through scientific and policy research, education and communication. The whole idea is to enhance the knowledge and look for developing techniques and methodologies to sustainably produce more food with less pressure on water resources, right? So we have 5 focus areas in our institute. You can go online and read about them. They involve climate, they involve water, they involve irrigation and groundwater, things that in Nebraska are some of our strengths. Nebraska is the #1 state in irrigated agriculture in the US, about 3.5 million hectares. And of course, very high productivity and the problems that come with that, right? With contamination of the aquifers and the sustainability of aquifer and so forth. One Health is the topic, is now internationally recognized as a practical and innovative approach to global health challenges, and recognizes the interconnection between animals and humans and their shared environment. This is an approach that our speakers are going to elaborate on with the water angle over the next 4 webinars. Water quality, of course, is part of that equation, right? Both the use and the reuse of water require controls in order to return that water into the environment, right? Even in municipalities, right? The water goes back into the stream. It's got to be treated. In agriculture, water goes back into the stream from irrigation runoff and so forth, and it has been impacted by its use, right? So how does this impact health? How does this affect the environment? All these are the topics for discussions. So appreciate you all attending. I'm going to, today's webinar is called One Health Approach for Global Healthy Water. Well, actually, One Health Concepts and Healthy Water for a Changing World is the actual title. I'm going to pass the word to Luciana Pires, who will be the moderator today. And she will introduce the speakers and moderate the session. So thank you all for attending. I invite you to go online and look at the other upcoming events and register. And then also today participate through our question and answer channel where you can ask questions to the speakers. So Luciana, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I would like to start thanking Dr. Christopher Neale and Professor Paulo de Tarso, our general coordinators of this webinar series, and especially for this opportunity to bring some experts to talk about One Health and water, such important topics, especially at this time that we are living. And we welcome everyone. And as a quick information, I just let you know that we have the question and the answer option, the Q&A box. And so if you have questions, that's the great place to put them. And then we will be monitoring during the presentations. And after our 2 speakers finish, we will have time for that. And Professor Molento will conduct the discussion. So to open our series, it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. And I will introduce our first speaker is Dr. Laura Kahn. So Dr. Laura Kahn is a physician and research scholar with the program on science and global security at the Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. Her education and training span nursing, medicine, public health, and public policy. A native of California, Dr. Khan holds a Bachelor of Science degree in nursing from UCLA, a medical doctor from Mount Sinai School of Medicine, a master's degree in public health from Columbia University, and a master's degree in public policy from Princeton University. And she's a fellow of the American College of Physicians. Dr. Khan has an important publication at CDC Journal of Emerging Infectious Disease named Confronting Zoonoses, Linking Human and Veterinary Medicine, that helped launch the One Health initiative, which seeks to improve the health of all species by increasing communication and collaboration between human, animal, and environmental ecosystem health specialists. She's author of Who is in Charge? Leadership During Epidemics, Bioterror Attacks, and Other Public Health Crises. She's also the author of another book called One Health and the Politics of Antimicrobial Resistance that was published by Johns Hopkins University Press. In 2016, the American Veterinary Epidemiology Society awarded her with their highest honor for her work in the One Health. And Princeton University awarded her course named Hogs, Bats, and Ebola, an introduction to One Health policy with a fund for innovation and undergraduate education. And recently, she converted this course into a free online Coursera course called Bats, Ducks, and Pandemics, an introduction to One Health policy that has enrolled almost 4,000 students from all over the world. Beyond this, she writes online columns for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and she has published in many peer-reviewed journals. Welcome, Dr. Laura. You can take it from here.
Thank you so much, Luciana. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you, wherever you may be. I'm going to share my screen with you. I hope everyone can see it. And we'll give you a One Health perspective on food security, clean water, and antimicrobial resistance. And I've got a lot of slides, so I apologize, but I'm going to be speaking rather quickly. So let me get started. And I have to present in this mode because otherwise it freezes up. So, One Health, you may or may not be aware, is simply the concept that human, animal, environmental, and ecosystem health are linked. And this concept, while it might seem obvious, is generally not done. Usually we just focus on humans. But nevertheless, it provides a useful framework for examining complex issues such as the ones we're going to talk about today. And we have to examine the root causes of different events, whether it's water contamination, antimicrobial resistance, emerging zoonoses, if we are to develop effective policies to address them. And we must remember that we interact with our environment every day by inhaling air, drinking water, and eating the plants and animals that we call food. I just like to highlight the One Health Initiative website that it's at the bottom of this slide. So the top 10 global causes of death that the WHO listed from 2000 to 2016, I just want to highlight that diarrheal disease in the year 2000 was in the top 10. It has since then dropped down by 2016, but in low-income countries, diarrheal diseases are still the second leading cause of death after respiratory infections. And they're generally spread by the fecal-oral route, and they have a deadly impact, particularly with children. And according to the WHO, children under 5 years have over 500,000 deaths from diarrheal diseases. Globally, about 1.7 billion cases of childhood diarrheal diseases, and childhood diarrheal diseases are a leading cause of malnutrition. So let's then now use this One Health framework to examine foodborne and waterborne illnesses and antimicrobial resistance. So we generally focus on animal fecal matter when it comes to diarrheal diseases, fecal oral transmission, but we can't forget about the animal fecal matter. And the study published in Environmental Science and Technology in 2017 found that animal fecal matter is a major cause of human diseases. Almost 2/3 of human pathogens are zoonotic, and 3/4 of emerging pathogens are zoonotic. So let me talk a bit about the magnitude of the issue. Humans and their domesticated livestock now constitute about 96 to 98% of the global terrestrial mammalian biomass. There's just not that much wildlife left. This is our livestock. This was in 1900. In 2000, it's even larger, the fraction of global mammalian biomass. The amount of wildlife is tiny. And the biodiversity of our livestock is actually quite narrow when you look at biodiversity across the different species. We have more broiler chickens on Earth now than any other bird. The standing population of broiler chickens is almost 23 billion birds. And consumption of chickens is increasing in many countries. And so the famous book by Taro Gomi, everybody eats, so everybody also poops. And humans and their domesticated livestock produce massive amounts of fecal matter, contaminating the environment and disrupting ecosystems. And this was a really important study published in Nature Sustainability in 2018. Estimating the total amount of fecal matter that humans and their domesticated animals produce. So they used the global population in 2014. At that time, it was 7.2 billion humans. Now we're up to 7.8 billion as of 2021. There's about 30 billion livestock, and they estimated back then that they produce around 4 trillion kilograms of fecal matter. And animal fecal matter makes up about 80% of it. The largest animal populations are chicken, cattle, and sheep. And the amount has been increasing each year as these populations grow. So just to kind of put into context, how much is 4 trillion kilograms of fecal matter? Well, it would fill about 1.6 million Olympic-sized swimming pools of fecal matter. And, or another way to think of it is if you took the entire surface area of Los Angeles and New York City, you would cover it with 6 feet of fecal matter, the entire surface of the 2 cities combined. So that's a lot. That's a lot of fecal matter. And we have to ask, where does it all go and what happens with it? This was an important literature review that I had mentioned earlier. They found only 62 studies actually looked at the human health outcomes of exposure to animal feces. Diarrheal diseases was the main outcome, almost 30%. Nutrition and growth is what we're seeing, childhood malnutrition, helminths, and other diseases, pathogens in the stool. The bacterial pathogens include E. coli, Campylobacter, Salmonella, and Shigella, which are the common diarrheal pathogens that we see in foodborne illnesses. And then there's protozoal pathogens, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, and Entamoeba, and of course the worms. In terms of exposure to animal feces, there's many ways of being exposed: water contamination, soil, food contamination, even flies, hand contamination, and fomite contamination. But the authors identified only 7 intervention studies aiming to reduce exposure to animal fecal matter. So the classic paradigm, if you will, of fecal-oral transmission focuses just on human fecal matter and the various ways that it can get into our food and our water and infecting humans. They propose a new transmission pathway looking at the animal feces and how they get then transmitted through a variety of different ways to both children and adults. So agriculture is the foundation of civilization, but it comes with considerable costs. That includes environmental contamination from a variety of things, including fecal waste, ecosystem destruction, and emerging infectious diseases. So the question then that we have to ask was, how do we feed everybody without destroying the planet's biosphere or the global sum of all ecosystems? Now, I mentioned the diarrheal diseases. If we just focus on foodborne illnesses, they are a major global health issue. And this involves primarily fecal contamination of food. And the pathogens, again, Campylobacter, Salmonella, come from animal fecal matter. So animal fecal matter is often used in crop agriculture, applied on agricultural fields. Rain causes runoff into waterways, and then you get the excess nitrogen and phosphorus causing eutrophication or algae blooms, and that leads to polluted water and dead fish, as well as contamination of our crops and waterborne illnesses. Now, if we focus primarily just on Brazil, since I know many of the members of the audience are from Brazil, one of Brazil's most precious resources are its forests. This one study looked at forests for water treatment. And they found that restoring about 3,000 hectares of forest around Rio would cost 26 million, but would avoid costs of almost 80 million over 30 years. Now, they argue that about 70% of Brazil's population is currently lacking treated sewage and wastewater. They're lacking safe drinking water, and they have poor sanitation. So, and using forests as a way of cleaning water would also spare the use of 4 million tons of treated chemicals and considerable amount of energy. This other study done in Global Environmental Change, published in 2015, looked at some of the services that ecosystems provide, including food, fresh water, fiber, and a number of other benefits. And in addition, the natives that live in the Amazon forest provide services to the forest themselves, including helping to maintain the forest and ensuring its health. So I'm going to shift gears now from foodborne, waterborne illness, fecal contamination, and talk about antimicrobial resistance and antibiotic use. Now, just as agriculture is the foundation of civilization, antimicrobials are the foundation of modern medicine. There's a number of different antimicrobials, but for this talk, I'm going to focus on bacteria and antibiotics. And it very much is a One Health issue involving humans, animals, and environments and ecosystems. So we live in a microbial world, and our bodies are mostly microbial. Our microbes that live in us and on us are as important for our health and well-being as any other organ. And when we eat, when we ingest the plants and animals that we call food, we're feeding our microbes as well as ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why eating a high fiber diet is so important, is because the microbes like high fiber. They aren't really very happy when you feed them highly processed, refined or high sugar foods. In addition to us having our own microbiomes, animals and plants have their own microbiomes too. This is a fascinating book on how microbes made Earth habitable. They did it by releasing oxygen. So we very much live in a microbial world. And the faster we recognize that and learn how to live in it better, the better off we will be. There's many different human aspects of antimicrobial resistance. Antibiotics have certainly saved many lives over the decades, but they also come with risks. Antibiotics generally adversely affect our microbiomes because they are broad spectrum treatments, meaning that they kill off the good bacteria along with the bad bacteria that we want to get rid of. In addition, our fecal waste carry antimicrobial resistance genes and resistant bacteria, and antibiotic treatment varies across countries and unfortunately has been increasing. I'll talk a bit about that in the next couple slides. But as I said, antibiotics adversely affect microbiomes. They indiscriminately kill the good with the bad. And I highly recommend this book by Martin Blaser, The Missing Microbes, where he's done quite a bit of study looking at the impact of antibiotics on conditions such as food allergies, obesity, asthma, and other autoimmune diseases, even certain cancers. All seem to have had some impact, adverse impact, from our widespread use of antibiotics. Antibiotic prescribing patterns vary widely across countries, suggesting that prescribing is cultural, not necessarily based purely on science. And not only is it cultural, but they appear to be increasing quite a bit in many upper middle and lower to middle countries. And you can see some countries have changed over time, particularly some of the upper middle and the lower middle as indicated here. China and India are some of the highest used countries in the world. Not only are antibiotics prescribed widely in different ways across different countries, but different countries also make antibiotics freely available over the counter without a prescription. So you can go into a number of countries and just pick out what antibiotic you want over the counter and purchase it, including Brazil. In some ways, the reliance on antibiotics as a form of primary care for whatever sniffle or ailment that you might have, if you don't have access to a doctor, or even if you do, you can treat yourself, and that can have horrific unintended consequences for the worsening problem of antimicrobial resistance. Now, it's not just a human issue, it's an animal issue too, not only in our food animals, but in our companion animals as well. Antibiotics affect their microbiomes, and like with human health, antibiotic use varies dramatically across countries. Pets are generally ignored in the entire antimicrobial resistance discussion. They should not be. We have to realize that many people share their homes, their beds, their food with their pets. They also share their microbiomes with them. This one study found that some companion animals bring methicillin-resistant staph, a very deadly resistant bacteria, resistant to methicillin, a potent antibiotic. And when these animals visit the children's cancer ward, that can pose problems because you can introduce then these resistant bacteria to immunosuppressed children. Antibiotic use is increasing in food animals, and as our meat consumption increases, antibiotic use is going to increase as well. And many of the medically important antibiotics are being consumed in some ways even more than in human medicine. Not only are antibiotics used in humans as well as animals, but they also impact the environment as well. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about the environmental component of antimicrobial resistance because it's huge and nobody ever talks about it. So we don't really understand what goes on below the surface of the soil. And for many years, scientists thought that soil bacteria used antibiotics as a form of chemical warfare against each other, since most of our antibiotics do come from the soil microbes. Since it's very difficult to grow soil microbes in the laboratory, scientists came up with a very clever strategy of extracting the genetic material directly from the soil and looking at that genetic material. Now, they don't know from which microbe that genetic material came from, but nevertheless, they found some really shocking results. And one was that antibiotic resistance genes were everywhere. The resistant bacteria are everywhere. They're in the Arctic, they're in the Antarctic. They appear to be ancient and ubiquitous. And in fact, they even found in this one study, 4 million-year-old bacteria found to be resistant to many antibiotics. So they termed this whole resistance around the world as the global resistome. So the global resistome is ancient and everywhere. And that's something that we generally don't recognize when we're talking about antimicrobial resistance. So it predates our use, but our use is making things much, much worse, because by blasting the environment with all of our fecal matter, both human and animal, that has antibiotic residues and resistant bacteria, and putting them on the agricultural fields, they mix with the soil microbes that already have resistance genes, and they increase then the expression of all these resistance genes around the world. So through our poor sanitation, through indiscriminate antibiotic use in humans and animals, untreated human and animal waste that's put on agricultural fields, then contaminate the land and the water, and wildlife spread resistance microbes and resistance genes all around the world too. Not only are antibiotics used in humans and animals, they're also widespread use on crops, such as apples and pears. And one WHO FAO OIE study found very little oversight of antibiotic use on crops. Only about 3% out of 158 countries even assessed the practice. Another major crop is rice, and it receives a lot of antibiotics. And for many people, rice is a staple for their diet. So the whole use of antibiotics across humans, animals, crops, it means that antimicrobial resistance can be spread by food. Even filth flies can spread antimicrobial resistance because they fly onto the fecal matter and spread that. And so from a One Health perspective, then it's all connected. You know, this microbial world that we live in, that we're profoundly changing with all of our fecal wastes, is contaminating our soil, our water, even our air, because they release greenhouse gases. And so they're changing it in ways that we don't really understand, but the resistance is happening much faster than we can develop new antibiotics. So the question then is, well, how much human antimicrobial resistance comes from animals? And that was one of the main issues that I was investigating in my book, One Health and the Politics of Antimicrobial Resistance. It's not entirely clear, and it also depends on the specific bacteria that you're studying. And what's very important is to look at the entire genome of the bacteria rather than just snippets of resistance genes. Because when you just look at the snippets of resistance genes, you can make all sorts of assumptions that generally aren't true. It's like trying to figure out who's, you know, if you put a whole bunch of redheads together in a room and you try and figure out how they're related to each other based on their hair color. Well, you can't do it because there's lots of people with red hair who have the red hair gene, but they're not related to each other at all. That's what we're doing with resistance genes. You really need to look at the whole genome. And when you do that, one particular resistant microbe, vancomycin-resistant Enterococcus faecium, or VRE, suggests that dogs might be playing an important role in the spread of that microbe. The assumption for a long time was that livestock were the culprit for the source of it, when in fact it might very well be dogs instead. So now, when we look at these links between fecal matter and antibiotic use, I apologize for the busy slide here, but let me just walk you through it because it's really important. So from that previous study that I talked about earlier, about all of us producing about 4 trillion kilograms of fecal matter and animals producing about 80% of it, but sanitation systems don't process animal waste. So this study that looked at global fecal matter found that certain countries have a lot more fecal matter than others, including China, India, Brazil, and the United States. When you look at the ratio of animal to human fecal matter, these countries stand out, Australia and New Zealand, because they have a lot more sheep than they do people. So their ratio of animal to human fecal ratio, their ratio of animal to human feces is very high. Now, if you look at the antibiotic use around the world, and this study was done published in 2014. So these are two separate studies. This study here looking at the fecal matter, and this study here looking at antibiotic use. What stands out is that for some inexplicable reason, Australia and New Zealand have the highest per capita antibiotic use of almost any other country. And you got to wonder, well, why does Australia and New Zealand use so much antibiotics? Well, nobody's really looked at this relationship between animal and human fecal ratio and antibiotic use. But I think it's really important that we investigate this to see if indeed there is a relationship between the amount of animal fecal matter in the environment and the amount of foodborne, waterborne illnesses, diarrheal diseases in the human population that are getting sick from all the fecal matter in the environment. It's not just, of course, animal fecal matter, because a lot of people are still openly defecating as well. And so some countries still have a lot of people who don't have access to sanitation, or in some countries they do have access, but they prefer not to use it. So fecal matter is, I think, a really important issue in terms of soil and water contamination and antimicrobial resistance. So because it's a lot hard, because the bacteria can develop resistance a lot faster than we can develop new antibiotics, perhaps we should start looking at some antibiotic alternatives for human and animal use. And one in particular alternative that I want to discuss are bacteriophages. Bacteriophages are the natural foes against bacteria. And in fact, the whole CRISPR-Cas9 system that you might have heard about that's used for genetic engineering is indeed the bacterial immune system against bacteriophages, also called phages. Phages are the most prevalent bioform on the planet, and they might be a viable strategy against resistant bacteria. There's certain pros and cons to using them. One is they are unlikely to disrupt the natural flora, the microbiome, because they are very specific. But however, because they're so specific, they're harder to use. And you have to have much better rapid diagnostics than what we currently have. There's a lot of process that needs to be done. I kind of view bacteriophages as the green energy equivalent of an antibacterial. There's a lot of potential, but like wind and solar power, which now it's starting to become economically feasible to use, but 30 years ago it wasn't. And I think we are still decades away, perhaps, from using widespread bacteriophage therapy. But I do want to point out this really interesting study that looked at the role of bacteriophages in the environment, because we really don't understand how our microbial planet works. So they looked at climatic conditions and how that might impact the microbial ecosystems, which would impact human health. And they looked at cholera outbreaks in Bangladesh. And what they found was that when you have a storm, it kind of disrupts the whole microbial ecosystem's homeostasis. And so what they found was that there's an inverse relationship between bacteria, the cholera bacteria, and the phages against the cholera bacteria, the vibriophages. So there's an inverse relationship. So when you have a lot of phages, you don't have any of the bacteria. But when a storm comes and washes the phages away, it allows the cholera bacteria to proliferate, and then you get a human cholera outbreak because they're drinking the water. Over time, when the vibriophages come back and reestablish homeostasis, the cholera bacteria plummet, and you see a rise in the phage concentration. And this goes on over and over again as storms come and storms go. And you can imagine with climate change, with more severe storms in our future, we're going to be seeing probably more cholera outbreaks as these homeostatic systems, microbial ecosystems, get disrupted. And these are images, electron micrograph images of the vibriophages in the waters in Bangladesh. So finally, I want to point out this really interesting TED Talk by Dr. Stephanie Strathty. She gave an amazing TED Talk on how sewage saved her husband's life. They were vacationing in Egypt when he came down with a pan-resistant Acinetobacter baumannii infection. It was resistant to everything. And he was medevaced home to San Diego, where they lived. And he was in the intensive care unit with all of his organs failing. And in desperation to save her husband's life, she went to the internet to look for a possible treatment. And she stumbled upon bacteriophages. And she contacted some different phage researchers, and they worked around the clock to find the exact phages to match his resistant bacteria that were causing his failing organs. Well, they gave him an infusion of the phage cocktail over 3 days, and he woke up and eventually was cured from this infection. And it was just a monumental event. And since then, UC San Diego has established a Center for Innovative Phage Applications and Therapeutics. There's growing interest now in the use of phages as a potential antibiotic alternative or adjunct. So we have to address antimicrobial resistance to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Phages are the natural foe against bacteria, as I said, and if we want to learn how to work with nature, if we want to have a sustainable society, healthy people, animals, and ecosystems, we need to integrate our efforts for a One Health approach, looking at humans, animals, environments, our microbial ecosystems, not only in our bodies, but in the soils and the waters around us, to really understand how our planet works and how our bodies work if we really want to have health. I've got this rather lengthy conclusion, but really I think the linchpin is we have to figure out what to do with all this fecal waste that we're contaminating our planet with. And that's really the linchpin in terms of water contamination, soil contamination, food contamination, and leading to increased antibiotic use. So With that, I'd just like to acknowledge my colleagues with the One Health Initiative. This is our website. It's been in existence since 2008. It's a labor of love for us. Please visit it. This is my Coursera course. It's now got over 4,000 students enrolled from around the world. It's free, so please visit it or tell your friends and colleagues to visit it. And with that, I would like to thank you all for your time and attention and look forward to any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laura. You brought us such a challenge issue to the discussion. And of course, we have a lot to learn and a lot of work, right? And I'm so admire of your work and thankful, very thankful that you have shared just a little bit of it with us. We will have the questions in the final, but thank you very much. We need more space to talk about this. And now I want to introduce our next speaker. And it's my pleasure to have Dr. Christina Pittenbrewer, and is my friend. And as I want to say that she is a senior veterinarian, director of the Animal Health Monitoring Program, and associate teaching professor in the Department of Comparative Pathology at School of Medicine in University of Washington. Christina received her veterinary degree in Brazil with a specialization in zoo and wildlife medicine, and moved to the US to continue her graduate and postgraduate studies in veterinary medicine. After a surgery and pathology residency at the Los Angeles Zoo, California, she accredited her degree in the United States at University of California, Davis, and pursued a Master of Science and residency in zoological medicine and comparative pathology at the School of Veterinary Medicine, University of California, Davis, with Dr. Murray Fowler and Dr. Linda Lowenstein. Following zoological and wildlife medicine residencies, she performed her postdoctoral research trainings in infectious disease at the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, and medical genetics and comparative medicine at the School of Medicine, University of Washington in Seattle. She is also an international reference and Fulbright ambassador for One Health, EcoHealth, Planetary Health, One Wellbeing in the USA and Latin America, with relevant publications and chapters in infectious disease, cancer, and One Health. She's also one of the founders of the One Health Brazil and One Health Latin America networks. So welcome, Christina.
Hi, Luciana and everybody. And it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here. And it feels that we are all meeting in Curitiba. And so it's, and also it's a pleasure to be with Laura, which is one of the pioneers in the United States with the One Health Initiative. So I feel honored to be here, and I thank you, all of you. I will share my lecture if you please, because I do live in a rural area. And if you do have any problem with the internet, please let me know, and I will try to be closer to the source of the internet. So I'll share my screen now. So it is a great pleasure to be with all of these collaborators and institutions together. And especially, I'm looking forward to participate with this course, One Health Concepts and Healthy Water for a Changing World, because we're changing the world every day. So it's very exciting to be here. And just a little brief history of me. I'm from Brazil, originally from Brazil, and from the University Federal of Viçosa, a veterinarian. And it's my early connection with One Health was through what we also call One Medicine. When I was a young veterinary student, and we had to go to this very, very underserved areas of Brazil, the rural Brazil, which was next to my university, to go for vaccination campaigns in animals and also to look at the farms. And at the same time, we had to take care of the humans. And by being a veterinarian as well, we always were exposed to the environment, whatever was happening. We were basically teaching basic health, as simple as how to boil the water. And my most experience in One Health was to sit with the community and share the differences of what we knew and what they could teach us. So it was a very interaction already with the human medicine as well. So even though we were veterinarians, we were exposed to little boys that came with the dogs, as you know, inside of bags. And it was a celebration to have the veterinarians there, the vet students. And at the same time, we had to take care of little kids that had parasites, that had cuts, and places where there was not enough health support. And many times you can see the little hippie van. We placed many humans to take back to the city so they could be provided human medicine. So as we all know, the history, right? We're not talking about history today, but as we all know, the history of one of the histories there, one medicine, which is the connection between human and animal medicine and the environment. I always start, today's not about history, but I always wanted to share that all of us who work with One Health, we know that One Health is for humanity. So I like very much to mention that from one of our colleagues that says no single person, no single health profession, no single organization, and no single nation or people invented or owns One Health. It is an all-inclusive, co-equal endeavor that belongs to all of humanity. So it is always, I always share with everybody, there's no copyrights, and because One Health is for humanity. And that's why here we are working together for a better world. As Dr. Laura also mentioned, it's always important. One Health is connected with the Sustainable Development Goals. So all professions are included, and this time we're going to talk about water, but as you can see, we cannot talk about water and the health of water and the health of the oceans and health of humans and animals if we don't have quality education. We need to have more One Health in the curriculums of the universities. We also cannot talk only about protecting the environment if we do not form partnerships and collaborations. So as I always mention, One Health is part of the Sustainable Development Goals, and all those goals are interconnected. Again, many people ask me, how can I be part of your group? Do I have to be a member? So it's like, as I mentioned, One Health is for the humanity, and again, so we can for the ones who are still coming to this area, make sure you get involved for all these associations, not only the ones that are already established and we follow as guidelines and we work together, but make your own One Health group, make a journal club, initiate a new group, and come and join us to work together. I like also, as this is part of the One Health initiative, that always we have to remember One Health is the collaborative effort of multiple disciplines working locally, nationally, globally to obtain the optimal health. Usually we have for people, animals, and our environment, and nowadays we're also adding plants. And also Dr. Laura is one of the pro bono and the pioneers for the One Health initiative. So it's always important to continue this concept. We're not talking about the One Health history today, but I do highly encourage you to go take the Coursera course. As you see, I also took it. But for me, when I am sharing the importance of One Health, especially developing curriculum, and I feel very proud to be here with the diverse professionals, especially co-teaching with Laura today, because I'm a veterinarian and she's a physician. And part of the One Health history, it's the One Medicine, where veterinarian and a physician worked together. So this is very important to share, because I will share a little bit about the One Health. How did it start in Latin America? And as we mentioned before, it did came from ancient civilizations, the agriculture, as Laura mentioned, and also for us in Brazil and Latin America, the indigenous populations. We wrote a chapter, what we call a review for the One Health Latin America history. Laura is also one of the co-authors, and we have more 16 co-authors from different countries, and it will be published in this special edition of the Frontier. So keep an eye, and we had summarized since how it started in Latin America, including Brazil as well. I cannot go moving forward if I don't talk about history, especially because in Brazil, Latin America, it came, I always mention to everybody, it came from action, it came from the grassroots movements, it came before we all knew the concept, because we need to work together in Latin America and South America. The One Health was already being developed as part as we needed to work together in collaboration with one another. But I like to bring this because of the waters. And that is, it brought to my attention that please do read the book on airs, waters, and places. And I will briefly here say that whoever wishes to investigate medicine properly should proceed thus in the first place to consider the seasons of the year and what effects of them produces, for they are not all alike, but differ much from themselves in regard to their changes. Then the winds, the hot and the cold, especially such as are common to all countries, and then such are peculiar to each locality. We must also consider the qualities of the waters. So since our course here is regarding the One Health concepts and healthful water from a changing world, there we go, 1400s BC, we had already a book published exactly talking about water. So please do read that book. It's amazing to go over. Other questions that they ask me, what is the difference between eco-health, planetary health, One Health? Which one do I want it to be on? Pretty much they are different views as if you had like different glasses, and who you were approaching first. If you're coming from the environmental, as you can see, the conservation and preservation of the habitats, how that changes the human and animal health. Planetary health, the whole coming from the most aspect of a human medicine and how that changed the environment and how the animals are affected. And the welfare, it's important also the one well-being of the animals. And in summary, everything is One Health, and once a year, several times of the year, or several conferences, we all get together and discuss our different point of views, and we have the same common goals and purpose, which is for a better world and a healthier world, a better planet. Sometimes I keep saying, okay, what is that? One medicine, One Health, eco-health, planetary health, one well-being, one world, one planet. Soon we will make better say one universe, because we're all here together. So just so you know, for your own learning, since there's some of you that perhaps this is the first time you're talking about One Health, please, there are a lot of websites, and we're here also to continue talking about it. But the vision is the One Health. Again, I always use this as a reference, as where you have an excellent publication that shows the interconnection of all the professions, of all the systems, all intrinsically interconnected. But for me, the most important is the principle of One Health, besides being for the humanity and not for an individual, it is coming out of the ego and think more about the ecosystem. And this, how we solve these problems, it's not only to think about medicine and veterinary medicine and health, but also we do have to consider culture, social, and even emotional in the geographic area, so we can have a successful One Health approach. I did add a little bit here also two things that we don't talk about it. It's arts and social sciences. And you see how it's important. My daughter, she always says, how you guys scientists can think and create if you don't have art, dance, music, theater? This is One Health also. So I always think, that's interesting. We do have to include arts and social sciences in our own One Health, One Medicine, and Eco Health, Planetary Health. So we're still growing. That's how I see. What is important? It's the importance. We are still divided into silos. For instance, I am a veterinarian, you are a physician, and I am on the environmental engineer. I am an agricultural engineer, and we still have that tendency, especially in academia, especially in universities, that we have our own specializations, that it's very important and we need to have it, but we still have the tendency to make our own small little silos and keep cultivating among ourselves. And the approach of the One Health is exactly what we're talking today. It's how, as Laura brought together, you cannot separate the water, the environment, the animals, and the humans. If you're talking, for instance, one of the topics, the antimicrobial resistance in health. So it is important that we work, and I'm very happy to be in this course here, that it's going to, I'm sure we're going to learn many from other professionals, that it is a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary professional teams, and also communities. So here I come again. What are the challenges? What are our perspectives? We still have to work hard and working together with the communities, come outside of the laboratories and go directly to the communities and learn with communities. I'm saying that because how much we have to learn from those ancient civilizations, from the indigenous populations, and at the same time go to the local, national, international, and global levels like we're doing today. Today is a very example that we have maybe 4 or 5 different countries or continents participating. I will give you some examples of the One Health approach. And from the point of view of veterinarians, when we're developing a curriculum of One Health in our universities, I always advise people, make sure you always have 2 lecturers at the same time from different professions. Like today we have Laura and I, a veterinarian and a physician, and many all of yours who are part of the panel. But I will bring today the aspect from a veterinarian's point of view, and even more from a pug's point of view, because we learn a lot from the animals. Why? Because we have our pug Sam always stopped. This is the beach near where I live here, in the forest behind me and very on the coast. We are pretty much dependent of the water. And not only I learned to stop and smell the flowers, something that us as professors in university, we don't have time for that, but also what he always taught me is like, observe the ocean, stop and see it. So this is one thing that we learn from the animals as well. And I always remember there's no way I can talk about One Health if I don't talk about humans, animals, and the environment. And again, we have this very tendency, now we're getting better, to bring the environment to the One Health concept. I will mention briefly some examples, and the examples that we're going to share with you is the COVID-19 and how we were prepared for the next pandemic. Again, Laura brought excellent points about the food safety and how the antimicrobial resistance is a very important issue, and also aspects of the global warming and or healthy environments. I always like to talk the importance of Brazil and Latin America in this development of the global One Health and especially economy. Let's go, I'll give you some examples. For instance, we already mentioned the importance of the antimicrobials in the water, but I will briefly say the pesticides and pandemics. One example I'll be giving is how it is interconnected, this idea of a human medicine, the veterinary medicine, and environmental health with the global warming, fertilizers, and one example of marine neurotoxins. And this example that was excellent given to from Laura in terms of the waterborne diseases and how we're going to, what are we going to do it? I always, my example number one is, oops, I'm sorry. Example number one, I always, for me, One Health is let's go have fun, let's go travel around our own minds, use our imagination. An example that we always have about One Health is Ebola. We all know that story of how did Ebola came out and how the anthropologists were the ones who were able to practically control the Ebola outbreak. This is a very fascinating story, also part of the history of One Health. It is what I mentioned as One Health and horror movie. If you're young, like all of us, you will see that in 1963 there was already a horror movie. If you know Hitchcock, it was that is an example, a classic example of One Health, and I'll share with you why. So this is a real history that happened in Monterey, California, and the movie is called The Birds. So please go watch it. It's the birds that start attacking the people, and it's a horror movie, and it literally happened. And it is an example. I'll give you what happened. It's published. And it was caused by domoic acid toxicity. So here, let's bring the water as an important factor, and with what we call the red tides or algae bloom, because there's a growth of the dinoflagellates. So one of the example, and it did happen, there was on that time a algae bloom. Therefore, there's a high production of domoic acid, and then in the shellfish, the oysters and shellfish, and because of the food chain, the birds eat the marine oysters and the shells, and which contains the domoic acid. And that causes what we call shellfish paralysis toxicity. And in this case, the birds who were eating the anchovies, who were eating the shells, they had that concentration of the domoic acid produced by the dinoflagellates on this red tide that becomes toxic, and that's hence that neurological symptoms. So there we go, One Health cinema, and One Health is a horror movie, right? What I wanted to share here and bring now for nowadays, it is a very important topic. For instance, here in our Pacific Northwest in Seattle, we do have to be careful, especially the indigenous population. They do harvest, and there is a chronic consumption of this food source. And we're now studying, what if there is a chronic development of domoic acid toxicity that is not the shellfish paralysis in humans and animals, but also that will be like interfering the chronic neurological growth of the children, especially, or other diseases associated with the populations that ingest the shellfish. Again, the red tides not only affect the birds, affects the humans, also the marine mammal. And there are different types of algae, not only some of them are not toxic, but many of them are. So for us to be paying attention. And if you remember, there was like recently, last year, there were, I think 400 elephants. I don't remember exactly how many elephants were dying in Africa. It ended up being, after many questions, a algae bloom. So let's see why that is happening. What is the cause? And mostly of them are environmental conditions that has pretty much in several areas the fertilizers. It has to do with excess of nutrients. It has to do with the sewage as well. Going back to Laura's and putting together how important it is, the sewage coming from our houses. And the climate change is one of the discussion that we have nowadays. I'm bringing that it's not only happens in United States, but it happens also in Europe and especially in Brazil. And there is a publication already for a group from Maranhão that it's how do we have to think? We're also interfering the population. In this case of Brazil, it's the fishermen and how they are affected. So it is our responsibility to think about and apply everything that we learn about One Health, we apply and work together with the populations. Now shifting from the example of the horror movie, let's go for horror movie number 2. Does anybody want some sushi tonight? Well, here we are. I left in Portuguese the PPP, which is fish, pesticides, and parasites. So it's not only the global warming or the fertilizers in the water that is happening, all this disturbance on the environment. We also have parasites in the fish, parasites in the animals as well, but it comes from health of the environment will be the health of water will produce healthy food sources for us. Example, in addition of the pesticides, I apologize for the phone call, but we have the pesticides that interferes with the salmon farming in Chile, for instance, and that caused a chaos in terms of economics and how we are having this globalization, not only in health, but how it's affecting economics in a population as well. So just remember that as veterinarians, and we do work as inspections, how the importance of veterinary medicine in human health, because this is part of our curriculum, and it is important to have veterinarians in the inspection of food, inspection of, and one of the most important, how we're going to prevent the future pandemics. So again, I'm bringing the importance of veterinary medicine in human health and environmental health. Another example that we're going to enter now, it is COVID. Of course, we're not going to talk about COVID today, all the mechanisms, and but there's no way how to escape COVID, because it is for us to think, what are we going to do as a preparedness for the next pandemic? This is not over. I think this is just the beginning of our future, and the importance of us to collaborate and work together. And again, what if the animals, how do they play an important role in the spreading of virus? As we all know, the zoonotic diseases, anthropozoonosis, zoonoses, there is a whole, like we can study this the entire year. I do ask you, there are several webinars in each details. But I just wanted to mention the COVID here because I wanted to bring to the water. And how we're going to predict and prevent the next pandemics. And there's no other way but through the One Health approach. So we do have to have different visions. As I mentioned to you, we all know that Ebola is an excellent case of how did all this One Health movement, also movement or philosophy or paradigm that started. But you can see every time we disturb the environment, we're bringing new and emerging infectious diseases. So we have to live peacefully and preserve the environment. All of these diseases or outbreaks have happened before. So for many of us, COVID is not a surprise. We kind of pretty much we were expecting, and we knew we're even working together to prevent. Unfortunately, there's a lot of political and economical issues that had interfered with what is happening right now. But if we don't do anything together, history repeats itself if we do not change. And the change starts with ourselves first. So the next big question is, and again, I'm thinking about water, because we're talking about water here, and not only the water is the source of life, not only on our own bodies, not only on our planet, it's pretty much the survival of our lives, but how we're taking care of this life. It doesn't matter if you live in a small little house that has animals and humans and all connected with no sanitation. But look at this. In an industrialized agriculture where you have the water right there next to a source of water that it's going to go back to the fecal matters being distributed all over. And what does it happen? And so it comes that putting the ideas together, how it's important that not only COVID, but many diseases that we can prevent, and we have to work together to prevent. And one of the questions that we have here is, what about COVID and water, or what is going on in terms of research? So here, one of our colleagues, one of our professors, and part of our studies, we do have COVIDs in pets studies, we do have COVIDs in humans, we have the vaccines, the studies in comparative medicine. We have also a group from the engineering. It's an interdisciplinary, intra-department work with the School of Global Health, Public Health, the engineering, and we're detecting the COVID-19 in wastewater. And yes, we detected COVID viruses in the water, especially where I live here, which is we call the Puget Sound where the sewage from Seattle comes to the Puget Sound, and I live on an island, and how that can come towards our water that surrounds our islands here. Not only that, we have the orcas whales here, and we have marine mammals. So the question was, can COVID be developed in marine mammals? And yes, it can, because the marine mammals, this is right in front of our island here, the orcas come, and because of the salmon, and they are highly susceptible. So if you study COVID, you know the different species of animals that are susceptible to COVID and others that are not, because of the receptors that in the cells that each species, each animals have it. And the whales and the marine mammals do have, they are highly susceptible. Therefore, there is a question. We're still investigating this, and that's why it's called, the evidence is murky. But some experts say the risk of infection is incredibly low. In COVID, as a veterinarian, as a researcher, I have learned not to say anything within the 24 hours, because in 24 hours, something happens tomorrow. So are we looking for the whales? Are we looking for the marine mammals? Are we really paying attention on the animals as sentinels? We need to work together. And as everybody says, in a small step, slow turtle step, we together can perhaps have a better answer and keep looking forward what we're going to do. So one of the ideas is challenges and the pretty much the prediction, like what are we looking for in the future? We do have to be more prepared. And there's an excellent article that teaches us how to do One Health and emergency preparedness. Not only that, but we do have to have our politicians involved, and we'd love to discuss that with you, especially in our state. We have our senators and governors that are One Health specialists. So we knock their doors and we pretty much teach them, and it has been very successful. So I always encourage Brazil and Latin America to leave your differences behind in terms of political parties, but think as One Health as public policies, and One Health for, again, the immunity and not for the individual. So we do have to change that at the political and government levels. Why? Because we're going to have more disasters. This is an example that, and you can see the water in Brumadinho and Mariana in the soil is, I don't even know how to say that, but it is full of toxicity, of toxins, of heavy metals. Have you ever questioned how many neurological diseases are already happening in humans, and what we're going to do about it? Let's talk about it. Have you ever noticed that all the levels of this, it isn't still in the water, and some of this can be prevented, but we also have to be prepared as interprofessional for the future natural and human caused disasters. The world is burning. For me, water and fire goes next to each other. And the Amazon is burning. California was burning. Washington State is burning. And here we come again. Goes back to the book, Airs, the Hippocrates book, Airs, Water, and Air, how it is intricately connected. So there's no way how we're going to have water in the forest if we're burning the forest. And so this is something that it is an issue. I know it's controversial, but it is part of us as professionals to find diplomatic ways how we are going to make difference. There is this live deforestation map. And also we have to talk about the global warming and not only the deforestation, but I always, and Laura can help me with this too, because it's something that both of us always talk about it, and it's very close to our heart. The indigenous populations, being a Brazilian, being from Brazil, we have to protect and we have to learn from our own indigenous population. They are one health, and we have to learn with them. So again, taking out the idea of getting out of the universities, getting out of the higher up institutions, and let's go to the echo to the echo. We have so much to learn, and we still don't know anything. In summary, so we all know it's cheaper to have a preparedness of pandemic, for instance, 4.5 billion, than what we have right now as expenses, as 570 billions that the world is in debt right now. So there's so much we have to change for global economy, public policies. Why are we talking about COVID and diseases, and why are we still here, right? So go back to the 17 goals to transform our world. We have to think about hunger and child malnutrition, which is still an issue, not only on underdeveloped world, but in the developing and developed world in our own backyards. So what are the challenges? Greater meaningful changes take time. Collaboration and not competition. Think about humanity and not as individuals. We have to start learning our silos no longer, but work together, and include other professions as we're doing here today. There's so many groups that there's no like, how am I going to be part? Which group am I part of? We're all one. So as many as you can connect and work. And today, thank you for the University of Curitiba, of Paraná, Federal of Paraná, the University of Nebraska for the Water for Food, giving us this opportunity, and all of the other members association. So in Brazil, we have the One Health. Luciana, do I have how many minutes?
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. So come working with us together. Every time I am preparing a lecture, I find another group. I was like, oh, look at this, One Water, One Health. It's the group from Arizona. So let's, with this opportunity, let's keep growing as a connection, and including the One Health. Brazil has its own group being formed now, not in the silos aspect, but in the silos, in the aspect of collaboration with your own specialties, the systems aquaticals. So come join us at the One Health Brazil, and we are all in this together, and that's why we call One Health. And my conclusion is, as individuals, what are you going to do? Thank you very much. And I would like to acknowledge and say thank you very much, Professor Paulo and Luciana and Professor Christopher, for letting us collaborate with you. And I am grateful for everyone that is here today, and my daughter and family, and that we all make a difference together. Thank you, Luciana.
Thank you, Christina. And I'm always happy to listen to you, your passion for all this and for connecting global health. And now we want to have more minutes, and I will introduce Professor Marcelo Molento, because we have time for a discussion. And so Professor Molento is our professor at Federal University of Paraná, and he has a PhD from parasitology from McGill University, and he's also the coordinator of a graduate course named Global Health to form thinkers to face different worldwide scenarios here at Federal University of Paraná. He's a consultant for research institutions in Brazil and countries in Latin America and United States, Belgium, and Netherlands. And he's also a consultant for parasitic disease and the human-animal interface to the Food and Agriculture Organization of United Nations and the WHO. So please, Professor.
Well, welcome everybody. And it's a pleasure for me to host this, to moderate the last part of the event. I would like to, first of all, to thank Dr. Laura Kahn and Dr. Christina Pittenbrewer for their excellent talks, very inspiring and full of details. And I'm sure people are eager to hear more about you and your research. I know that Dr. Laura Kahn has answered some of the questions, which is fantastic, very elegantly. But I have to open the floor again. And I do have my personal questions, of course, for both of you. And I would like to start as, you know, bringing the elephant in the room, okay? How do you feel that, how can we literally impact the problems that we raise regarding water safety and the water consumption and the future of water?
That's a really tough question. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. Engineering, certainly, water sanitation systems, you know, in addition to the human and animal element. You know, we from as far as I know, we haven't all come to the table to talk about it. I mean, everybody's just doing their piece. And that's part of the goal of One Health, is to try and bring everybody together to try and come up with answers. You know, as the world becomes more urbanized and we have these huge mega cities, we're going to need to have state-of-the-art sanitation systems to provide clean water for you know, these growing urban populations. I mean, it's not just the rural impacting on the urban, you know, the agricultural runoff, but it's just all the waste that are being produced in urban areas as well. And I'm just not sure. I mean, here in New York, for example, we have sanitation systems for human waste. And we do have laws in place that you're supposed to clean up after your pet when you walk it. But I can tell you that there's animal waste everywhere. And just anecdotally, my dog just came down with Giardia because we don't know where he picked it up, but there's animal fecal waste all over the city, despite the laws to pick it up. You know, people either don't bother or they leave the bags on the ground. It's a real challenge. You know, human behavior is a big part of it.
Fantastic.
And, you know, I'm not sure how we can get people to care enough about their environment to not leave it contaminated. It's an issue that is not going to have an easy answer, but it certainly involves behavior change.
Thank you.
Christina, do you have any comments?
Yeah,
Yep.
when I think that's, I was going to mention to you, please share with us the Giardia, because at the point I was like, a Giardia, my brain goes all the way to a place, there's no sanitation in the water. And when they close down and it goes like, what? New York City? That's impossible. This is first world. Can that happen? And it's right there, right? So I always, even we joked, oh, this is One Health. So the parasitology, it happens everywhere. So as humans, doesn't matter if you're in the big New York City, first world, or if you're in the middle, as I mentioned when I was in Brazil, we are literally in very rural areas. And the most important was to educate. And we have to, and again, how we're going to educate the communities, not coming and imposing our ideas and trying to change the cultures, but how we can work together. So as simple as boil the water, and we're able to save many children in the middle of Minas Gerais, very impoverished areas, and change the health. So I think we have to have this global health aspect and be proactive as much as we can through education, through whatever we're doing here right now. We're training new future leaders with a different, as like even you, Marcelo, and we came like we specialize. How many more postdoctoral trainings do I need to? Wait a minute, there was one point that I only worked in one gene in cancer. It was like, whoa, we're so specialist that now we have, it was like, what's happening? I have to a branch that like, oh, if you throw a pesticide in the water, that is affecting something else. Or even in the cancer research, if you messed it up with the environment, you're messing up with our tumor cells. So it's having this holistic approach, but education, it goes back to education, as simple as flyers, going with the students from the communities, but also among ourselves, how we shift this. And that's why I think we're passionate about One Health.
Yeah. I think one of the main issues is also to reduce the impact of our living, reduce the consumption, the rate of, many times that we go to the supermarket to buy, things that we don't need, or it's not us, but it's a habit, that humanity has, and it's destroying because we need more raw material. We have to deforest more, we have to plant more, we have to graze more, and we don't have that much space to do it. Well, one thing that Dr. Laura has spoken a lot was antibiotics resistance. And I do work with anthelmintic resistance, and it's something that is a very pressing issue in Latin America and in Australia and Africa, and countries that have a large livestock population with little control, let's say. And one number that I came across, I produced myself by calculating the amount of acaricides that are being released in the environment after the animal is spread, okay, to control ticks or to control flies, things like this. It's around 200 million liters just in the south of Brazil per year. And it's amazing how people can survive with that. We need more ecotoxicology groups, and we need more work to bring together this amount of research that everybody's thinking of doing. And more, what I see are research journals that are having more impact, that are not specific to the topic. So, as you said, Christina, more to see a more holistic scenario. Okay, so more and more you see journals, a very broad kind of journals, and these journals are picking up really fast. Okay, any comments on pesticides where you live and things like this?
Well, I mean, pesticides are another huge issue, and of course, you have resistance to pesticides too. I mean, it's not just antimicrobial resistance, it's pesticide resistance. But the other side of the issue is pesticides in a way are like antibiotics. They kill the good with the bad. And so many of our, foods require pollination services from bees and other insects. And if you're, and the bee pollination has been plummeting worldwide,
Mm.
largely because of widespread use of pesticides. You know, you're killing the pests, but you're killing the pollinators. And that's then poisoning the environment. And insects are the linchpin for ecosystems. So many animals and birds rely on insects for food. So when you start just kind of, you know, widespread use of pesticides for, you know, to reduce the pests and food loss, you're also having the unintended consequences of destroying your ecosystem. You're disrupting the biome. You know, we talk about disrupting the microbiome. We're destroying the biome with insects that all these animals rely on. And we're seeing the results of that. I mean, you know, they're calling it the insect apocalypse, where, you know, just plummeting numbers of insects, and the bird populations are plummeting. And, you know, that's a chain reaction down the line, which is ultimately impacting us, only we're not choosing to see it. So we really need to rethink our use of pesticides, which I think are in the long run unsustainable if we want to have healthy ecosystems to sustain biodiversity, because we're losing it in a dramatic
It's kind of frustrating sometimes. Yeah. Christina, yeah, if you have.
Yes, I will go with my own personal experience because I did work. One of my postdocs was on organophosphates toxicity, and we all know about Roundup, which is the one that it's no longer used here in the state of Washington. We were able to, through our research, to take out of the market, especially at the farmers, because we worked with see again how One Health has to do with culture, policymakers, politics, and economics, because most of our population here are from Mexican immigrants in our farms. And so we had to study and take it out of the market on the farms. It's no longer used, Roundup or organophosphates in the farms. Unfortunately, it has been sold to other countries, including Brazil. So it is polemic, it's controversial. I would love to talk about more pesticides, but just as a personal experience, there is genetic susceptibility to the organophosphates. And sometimes you might say, well, that didn't happen to that population. Well, but it did happen to others. So as humans, as we all have a genetic susceptibility, there are what we call the polymorphisms of the genes. Not only that, but animals as well. So we're affecting that. So where does it all go? It goes to the soil, it goes to the water, and it comes to us in food. So it is something very, it has to, I think we should go all be in politics. That way we can change, bringing, and why we can't use diplomacy to change the policies, because we are aware what can happen and we can act somehow.
Fantastic. So I will close the session by bringing the question from Joseph Hunt. I know that Dr. Laura Kahn has given some answer, but I would love to have you guys answering that together, because it is one of these social aspects, right? We are not dealing with professionals that are pouring antibiotics in the environment. We are the people who are poisoning ourselves. So it's sort of a social problem that they have in India. And it's not only in India, Joseph. We have this habit in South America, in Bolivia, for example. You can barely, you can defecate on the street, let's say, okay? But it's a social habit. Please, so the question is, open defecation, for example, in India, is seen as a public health problem. Important, but narrower than One Health. How can we change this approach? So, Dr. Lara, if you want to complement your answer already.
You want me to elaborate more on that?
Yeah, just a little
Well,
bit. And
I mean,
then
it's very hard to change cultural practices. You know, individual behavior change is hard enough, much less changing an entire country's practices. You have to change the culture. And usually you have to start with the young. The young are more open to learning new behaviors than those who have been set in their ways for decades. That's not to say that you can't change an adult's behavior, but it's easier to do it with the young. So that's one thing. And you know, I think people don't. I don't think people realize the microbial world that we live in, and that's you know, certainly education. And I think one major breakthrough, because microbes are invisible to the naked eye, there is this group that developed a penny microscope out of cardboard, where you can very cheap. I'll look for it on the. It's a paper microscope. It's very cheap, but very effective in teaching people that, you know, there are microbes all around them, and by openly defecating, you know, you're contaminating your environment and making yourself sick, much less, you know, the other people in your family, friends, in addition to all the animals that are walking around and defecating too. So you know, it's hard when you're dealing with something that's invisible to the naked eye, and it requires a lot of education in order to try to develop behavior change. So I'll leave it at that. Christina, do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I think what I would like to share is it starts with the change within ourselves to start, which is already hard.
That's a good point.
Every day I wake up in the morning, it's like, okay, let's change. And so it does change within ourselves first, and then we can change others, or at least inspire others. But I wanted to share our experience in Latin America. And I also would like to share with all of you today. We have other colleagues from University of Alaska and also University of Colorado, and Dr. Madalena Serpa. She's from Colombia, a physician from Colombia. And we have been talking as part of the One Health Latin America, Ibero and Caribbean network. We also have One Health Colombia that work with they are right there on the biodiversity and work with the communities and the preservation of turtles, but also the education. So they bring education to the population, not only conservation of the turtles, which is interesting, the turtles, that's cultural. It is eaten during the Easter time. We're not going to change the culture. So as much as you mentioned, but we were able, especially through the One Health partnerships and One Health initiatives in Colombia, for instance, they were able to educate the children. And that's going back again for the importance of education. We do have the One Health Commission, One Health Initiative, and again, One Health of Brazil, One Health everywhere in the world has this K to 12 One Health education. So we're starting at the children's level, because we are not going to, it's not, how to say, we have to respect the culture. Fantastic. But the children can make a difference as well. And us at the university levels, we're adults, we can change ourselves first. So it's just like multidisciplinarity also is part of that.
Very nice. Thank you both for your participation. It was a pleasure for me to moderate the last part of the session. Of course, we could stay here and discuss about how vegetarianism could save the world, or even more, cell-based meat or plant-based meat, or other alternatives that would reduce consumption and reduce depression issues to the environment. Okay, I'm not trying to jump into the politics of it, but also we need to get together and close to the politicians, because, you know, it is important for us to be able to discuss this in a more official way, let's say. You know, if we want to change, let's change it from the top to the bottom. Sometimes it is important. What you guys were saying is that it is important to change culture from the bottom to the top, okay? So yeah, everything is connected, as you mentioned. I work a lot in the issue of dilution, okay? So what we are seeing a lot is depression, the selection pressure for resistance, let's say. And a big part of my work is to have, you know, populations or effective strategies to dilute the selection, so to bring the selection backward. So again, I thank you so much, and I would like to close the session. I should
I
call.
have one last question, Marcelo. May I?
Sure. Yes, please.
That's a very, very short one. I want to know if you have United States any kind of law or policy working with the drug industry to give them some responsibility for the problem with the antibiotic resistance and the growing of the consumption all around the world, and mainly United States. Mm-hmm. Something that I am curious to know. How the government is working with this?
Well, the Obama administration certainly recognized the challenge, and they were the Obama administration developed a plan to deal with antimicrobial resistance, and I'm happy to, I don't know if that's still available on the website, but of course, during the 4 years of the Trump administration, that all was eliminated. So fortunately, we now have the new Biden administration, and hopefully a lot of the policies, the efforts that Obama put in place will be renewed. So it's a work in progress, if you will. I mean, certainly the pharmaceutical industry is aware of these issues. It's, as you can imagine, it's very political. Antibiotics are no longer used as growth promoting agents in the United States, or at least they're not supposed to be. But that doesn't mean that antibiotics aren't used in animal agriculture. They're used for a variety of other purposes. And of course, nobody wants to eat a sick animal, and nobody wants an animal to suffer. But you know, the whole animal agriculture industry, you know, you're dealing with thousands of animals being placed together. They didn't evolve to live in such tight quarters. And of course, you're dealing with all of their wastes, and that can contribute to infections and illness. So it's all connected. And, you know, we need to be able to develop effective, acceptable policies that everyone can implement. And again, that requires a lot of education and outreach. So thanks for your question.
And just to add and be proud of Brazil and be proud of Paraná, Curitiba, there is a document, a memorandum of agreement with the politicians in Paraná through the One Health Commission from the, Luciana helped me here. It's our group of the One Health Brazil and several universities in Paraná that got together and signed a document for the One Health approach. So I always remember, like, Brazil sometimes is quiet there, but it's already working very hard, as much as we do here, Laura, with our governments and with our states. And we're very successful by going, knocking the door of them and trying to be diplomatically. I always say at the beginning, I used to say, oh no, One Health is not political. Oh, now I'm quite the opposite. I use the One Health knowledge and all of us as professionals to show and work together with the government and the politics, because they are still the leaders. So I just wanted to make sure that Paraná has an excellent connection with the politicians and should be continuing with that.
Yep.
I was there when they were signing, so that's why I was like, yes, 2 years ago.
All right, I return it to you, Luciana.
Okay, thank you. It was perfect. And I'm very happy to listen to all of you, and a lot again. We welcome and we thank you for being here, part of this program, and to share your knowledge and inspiring us with these challenging issues. And I want to remember, and I want to thank everybody for being with us. And sorry for that we are a little bit advanced in our time. Thank you very much, everybody.
A pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much,
Right.
everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
We'll see you again.
Congratulations again for the event.